For decades, psychologists thought the best you could do after trauma was get back to normal. Turns out they missed something huge. The entire field was focused on damage control, treating PTSD, managing symptoms, helping people return to their baseline. Which makes sense, obviously, but it meant researchers weren't really looking at people who seemed to be doing more than just surviving. And I'm not talking about toxic positivity or pretending everything's fine when it's not. I'm talking about actual, measurable psychological changes that go beyond recovery. This oversight lasted until the mid-1990s, when two psychologists started asking a different question entirely. Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte started noticing something in their clinical work that didn't fit the standard model. Some of their clients, who'd been through terrible things, serious illness, loss of loved ones, life-threatening situations, weren't just getting back to normal. They were reporting that their lives had changed in positive ways they couldn't have imagined before. Not despite the trauma, but in some weird way through engaging with it. So, Tedeschi and Calhoun did what good researchers do. They started systematically studying it, and by the mid-90s, they'd given it a name: post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth shows up in 5 main areas, according to their research. First, people report deeper relationships. Not more relationships necessarily, but the ones they have feel more meaningful. Second, they see new possibilities in their lives that they couldn't see before. Third, they feel personally stronger, like they know they can handle things now. Fourth, there's often a greater appreciation for life in general. The small stuff matters more. And fifth, some people experience changes in their spiritual or existential beliefs, though that doesn't necessarily mean religious, just a shift in what feels important or meaningful. These aren't subtle changes, by the way. People describe them as fundamental shifts. Now, this is different from resilience, and that distinction matters more than you'd think. Resilience is your ability to go through hardship and then continue with life afterward, basically bouncing back to where you were before. It's really important, don't get me wrong, but it's about returning to your baseline. Post-traumatic growth is about transformation beyond that baseline. You're not the same person you were before, and in specific, measurable ways, you've changed in a direction you consider positive. You can have resilience without growth, and honestly, you can have growth without being particularly resilient during the actual trauma. They're related concepts, but they're not the same thing at all. But here's where it gets complicated, and this is something researchers are still wrestling with. In April 2025, a systematic review published in the Journal of Loss and Trauma looked at whether post-traumatic growth actually sticks around over time. What they found is that about half of people who report PTG show stable growth. It's still there years later. But the other half? Their reported growth varies substantially over time. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. And we don't entirely understand why. This makes sense if you think about it, though. Psychological change is messy. It's not like flipping a permanent switch. And depending on when you ask someone, they might give you different answers. The COVID-19 pandemic gave researchers an unusual opportunity to study resilience and growth at scale, since basically everyone was going through the same collective adversity at once. In February 2026, Joseph Anthony Pettit at Bangor University published findings in PLOS One, showing that people who reported higher levels of resilience had lower anxiety and depression during the pandemic, and they used better coping strategies overall. Now, that study focused on resilience specifically, not growth, but it showed how individual differences in handling adversity play out in real time. Some people had the psychological tools to manage uncertainty better, and those tools made a measurable difference in their mental health outcomes. This June, 2 separate studies came out that got into what's actually happening biologically when you go through adversity. And this is where things get genuinely weird. UCLA psychologists found that mitochondria, the little power plants in your cells, actually increase their respiratory capacity after you've experienced greater early life adversity. Your cells are literally working differently at a metabolic level. And that's not damage necessarily, it might be adaptation. The researchers are still figuring out what this means functionally, but it suggests that adversity leaves physical traces in your body that aren't just about stress damage. They might be about your system recalibrating to handle future challenges differently. The other June 2026 study, this one on primates, found that early life adversity leaves what they're calling a lasting molecular imprint across the body. Different tissues respond differently to both age and adversity. They each have their own epigenetic landscapes. Baptiste Sadughi, a postdoctoral researcher at ASU who co-led the study, pointed out that this means adversity doesn't just affect your brain or your stress response in some generalized way. It's affecting multiple systems in your body simultaneously, and those effects can persist. We're talking about changes at the epigenetic level, which means the adversity is influencing which genes get expressed and how, potentially for years after the initial experience. So why does any of this biological stuff matter for understanding post-traumatic growth? Because it suggests that when people report fundamental changes after trauma, they might not be exaggerating or reframing their experience through rose-colored glasses. There might be actual physiological changes happening that support those psychological shifts. Your body and brain are responding to adversity in ways that go deeper than we thought. And some of those responses might enable new capabilities or perspectives that weren't accessible before. It's not that trauma is good, obviously, but the system's response to trauma appears to be more complex than just damage and repair. There's adaptation happening, and we're only beginning to map it. But let's be really clear about something. None of this means trauma is necessary for growth, or that you should be grateful for terrible things that happen to you, or any of that toxic positivity nonsense. Post-traumatic growth research isn't saying everyone grows from trauma. Plenty of people just suffer, and that's the end of it. And even among people who do report growth, remember that stability study? Half of them show variability over time. Growth isn't universal, it's not guaranteed, and it doesn't cancel out the harm that was done. It's just one possible outcome that we weren't paying attention to for a long time because we were focused entirely on pathology. There's still a lot we don't understand about post-traumatic growth. We don't know exactly what predicts who will experience it and who won't. We don't know if there are specific types of trauma that are more likely to lead to growth, or if it's more about the person's response than the event itself. We're just starting to understand the biological mechanisms that might support it, and we definitely don't know how to reliably facilitate it therapeutically. You can't exactly prescribe post-traumatic growth like you can prescribe evidence-based treatments for PTSD. The research is ongoing, which means a lot of the questions are still open, and probably will be for a while. What post-traumatic growth research really does is expand our understanding of what's possible after something terrible happens. For 30 years, the goal was to get people back to normal, and that's still an important goal for many people. But for others, the trajectory isn't about returning, it's about becoming something different. And that difference isn't necessarily worse. Sometimes it's genuinely better in ways that matter to them. That doesn't make the trauma worth it, but it changes how we think about recovery and what we're aiming for in treatment. Recognizing that growth is possible gives people a different framework for making sense of their experience. If you got something out of this, a like actually helps with the algorithm, and subscribe if you want more videos like this.